Close your eyes for a second and try to imagine this. No electricity. No streetlights bleeding orange through your curtains. No phone screen. No refrigerator hum. No distant traffic. Nothing. Just dark, the kind of dark that people living in cities have genuinely never experienced in their lives. The kind of dark where you hold your hand 6 inches from your face and see nothing. Where the stars aren't a romantic backdrop but the only light source between you and absolute blindness. That's every night. For every human who ever lived, for the overwhelming majority of our existence as a species. You are Homo sapiens, somewhere between 50,000 and 200,000 years ago. The sun goes down. It doesn't just dim, it vanishes. And the night stretches out ahead of you, somewhere between 10 and 14 hours depending on the season, with no artificial way to shorten it, skip it, or fill it with a streaming service. So what did you actually do? This is a question that almost no one asks. We spend enormous amounts of research time on what ancient humans ate, how they hunted, how they made tools, what they believed. But the night, 8 to 12 hours of every single day of every human life ever lived before about 150 years ago, gets surprisingly little attention. And when researchers finally started looking at it seriously, what they found was not what anyone expected. Ancient humans at night were not simply unconscious. They were not huddled in terrified silence waiting for dawn. They were not even primarily sleeping, at least not in the way we understand sleep today. They were, it turns out, doing something that modern humans have almost completely lost. And the loss of it might be costing us more than we realize. Let's start by dismantling something you probably believe about yourself and everyone who came before you, the idea of 8 hours of solid, uninterrupted sleep as the natural human default. It isn't. It never was. In 2015, a researcher named Jerome Siegel at UCLA published a landmark study that sent quiet shockwaves through the sleep science community. He and his team studied 3 pre-industrial hunter-gatherer groups, the Hadza in Tanzania, the San in Namibia, and the Tsimane in Bolivia, populations that still live largely without electricity, without artificial light, without alarm clocks or social schedules. People whose sleep patterns represent the closest living approximation we have to what ancient sleep looked like. What they found completely contradicted the modern assumption. These populations slept, on average, between 6 and 7 hours per night. Not 8. Not 9. 6 point something to 7 point something. And crucially, they almost never slept in one continuous block. Instead, they slept in what researchers call segmented sleep, falling asleep sometime after dark, waking for a period in the middle of the night, and then sleeping again until dawn or shortly before it. That period of waking, sometimes an hour, sometimes 2, was not insomnia. It was not a malfunction. It was completely normal, universal across the group, and appeared to be a deeply ingrained biological pattern. Historian Roger Kirch had actually documented this extensively even before Siegel's study, through a different method. He spent 16 years reading historical documents, diaries, medical texts, court records, and literature from medieval Europe, and found over 500 references to what people then simply called first sleep and second sleep. This was not uncommon language, it was the standard description of a normal night. You had your first sleep, you woke, you did things for a while in the quiet dark, and then you had your second sleep before morning. What did they do in between? Everything. Court records from medieval Europe document people visiting neighbors during this interlude. Diaries described lying awake thinking, praying, having conversations with their spouse. Some accounts describe it as the most mentally clear and creatively fertile period of the day, the hour when problems got solved, when dreams were analyzed, when plans were made. The psychiatrist Thomas Ware conducted experiments in the 1990s in which he exposed modern adults to 14 hours of darkness per night for a month, simulating pre-industrial light conditions. Within a few weeks, every single participant spontaneously developed segmented sleep. They woke in the middle of the night, lay quietly alert for 1 to 2 hours, and fell back asleep. And almost universally, they reported that the waking period felt profoundly calm, different from any waking state they normally experienced. Their blood tests showed elevated prolactin levels during this interlude, a hormone associated with deep relaxation and the mental state experienced during meditation. The architecture of ancient sleep was not primitive or inferior. It was a different, and in some ways richer, relationship with consciousness and darkness than the compressed, artificially homogenized sleep block modern humans attempt, and increasingly fail, to maintain. Here's a reframe that sounds almost too simple until you sit with it. For the overwhelming majority of human existence, fire was the only light after sunset. Not one of several light sources, the only one. And unlike electricity, which you flip on and then ignore, fire is alive. It moves. It shifts. It responds to wind and breath. It makes sounds. It throws shadows that move independently of the things casting them. Anthropologists studying modern hunter-gatherer communities have documented something striking about what happens around evening fires. People stare at them. For hours. Not blankly, interactively. The fire becomes a social focal point in a way that no modern technology quite replicates. Polly Wiesner, an anthropologist at the University of Utah, spent decades documenting conversations among the Juhon Bushmen of the Kalahari. She recorded hundreds of hours of talk and then categorized what was discussed, separating daytime conversation from evening, firelight conversation. The difference was dramatic. Daytime talk was, overwhelmingly, practical. Work, food, logistics, complaints, criticism, resource disputes. The stuff of daily survival. Firelight talk was almost entirely stories. Narratives of hunting and travel, yes, but also stories about distant people, about the past, about spirits and meaning and how the world worked. Firelight talk was creative, moral, speculative, relational. It was, in Wiesner's analysis, the medium through which identity was constructed and transmitted. The campfire was where a group became a culture rather than just a collection of individuals. This has evolutionary implications that run very deep. The capacity for extended narrative, for imagination, for theory of mind, for thinking about other people's inner states, for constructing scenarios that haven't happened yet, these are the cognitive features that most sharply distinguish humans from every other species. And the firelit night may have been their primary rehearsal space. The cognitive gym where the uniquely human brain sharpened the very capacities that would eventually produce language, religion, art, and civilization. The fire wasn't just keeping you warm. It was making you human. Darkness does something strange to human social dynamics, and ancient humans almost certainly knew this in their bones even without the vocabulary to describe it. When you cannot see clearly, a different kind of intimacy becomes possible. Researchers who study social behavior have documented this effect repeatedly. People disclose more in low light. They say things they wouldn't say in full daylight. Hierarchies flatten. The dominant individual in a group is less visually dominant when faces are half-lit by fire. The quiet person who defers all day in bright open spaces finds it easier to speak around a fire in the dark. Ancient groups were small, typically between 20 and 50 individuals who knew each other with an intimacy no modern person experiences. These were people who had spent years watching each other survive, fail, grieve, celebrate. The night, and the particular quality of firelit darkness, may have created the conditions for a depth of interpersonal connection that was functionally essential to group cohesion. There's also evidence, from both anthropological observation and from what we know about human bonding hormones, that physical closeness at night served purposes beyond warmth. Sleeping in close physical contact with trusted individuals, which was the universal default in ancient life, releases oxytocin. It regulates stress hormones. It signals safety at a neurological level in ways that individual sleep in separate rooms simply does not. Ancient humans didn't have the option of isolation. But it may be that isolation wasn't just impractical. It was actively harmful in ways they never had to discover because the social architecture of their nights prevented it from ever happening. Here is a myth worth dismantling carefully, because it's subtle: the idea that pre-literate ancient humans were informationally impoverished. That without writing, without books, without the ability to record things, knowledge was scarce and transmission was unreliable. The truth is almost the opposite. Knowledge in oral cultures was extraordinarily robust, but it required something modern knowledge does not. It required performance. It required human presence. It required the night. Every ancient society we have any record of, through anthropological fieldwork, through archaeology, through the earliest written documents that clearly preserve oral traditions, organized its most critical knowledge into forms designed for nighttime transmission. Songs, chants, rhythmic narratives, call and response patterns, ritual sequences. These weren't primitive substitutes for books. They were sophisticated memory technologies, and they worked by exploiting the same neurological machinery that makes music stick in your head 3 days after you've heard it. The elders of a group didn't just casually mention important things in passing. They performed them. Around fires, at night, to audiences that included every generation simultaneously, children learning for the first time, adults reinforcing what they knew, elders maintaining the tradition. The night was when the accumulated knowledge of the group was actively kept alive. Aboriginal Australians maintained accurate geographical knowledge of the Australian continent, navigation routes, water sources, ecological information, through songlines, intricate narrative musical systems that encoded information about landscape into sequences of song that could be performed and recalled across generations. Some of these songlines are now confirmed to preserve accurate information about geological events that occurred over 10,000 years ago. Coastline changes from sea level rise. Volcanic eruptions. Events so ancient that they're barely within the range of human memory, preserved with apparent accuracy through nothing but performed narrative, almost certainly around fires, at night, for thousands of years. This is not primitive information management. This is a technology operating at a level of temporal durability that nothing written has yet matched. The night was the library. The storyteller was the server. And the fire was the reading light. On a clear night with no artificial light, you can see approximately 2,000 stars with the naked eye. The Milky Way is not a faint smear, it is a structure. A river of light crossing the entire sky with visible density variations, dark lanes, brighter cores. Planets move against the fixed stars in patterns that repeat on known schedules. The moon changes shape on a precise cycle of 29.5 days. The entire sky rotates predictably through the night, and the angle of that rotation shifts measurably through the seasons. Ancient humans saw all of this. Every night. For their entire lives. Archaeologists have found evidence of systematic astronomical observation going back tens of thousands of years. Notched bones from 30,000 years ago in Europe that appear to track lunar cycles. Cave paintings that may encode star positions. The architecture of monuments like Newgrange in Ireland, built over 5,000 years ago, precisely aligned to capture the winter solstice sunrise, which would have required systematic nighttime observation across multiple years to calculate correctly. These were not accidents. They were not decoration. They were records, the product of sustained, organized, multi-generational observation of the night sky that had profound practical implications. Knowing the stars meant knowing where you were. The night sky was the original global positioning system, usable anywhere on Earth without any technology beyond eyes and memory. Ancient Polynesian navigators crossed thousands of miles of open ocean using star paths they had memorized, not as abstract knowledge but as practical, embodied skill learned through years of nightly observation. Knowing the sky meant knowing the seasons. Not approximately, precisely. Planting calendars, migration tracking, the timing of ritual events that coordinated group behavior, all of this depended on accurate astronomical knowledge that could only be built through sustained attention to the night sky over years and decades. There is also a dimension here that's harder to quantify but probably more important than any of the practical applications. What does regular, lifelong, unmediated confrontation with the actual scale of the universe do to a human mind? Every ancient human adult knew, viscerally, from direct experience, that they were a small creature on a dark planet surrounded by an incomprehensible vastness of stars. Not as a fact they'd read somewhere, as a nightly lived reality. The philosophical and spiritual implications of that aren't separate from survival. They're woven into how ancient humans understood their place in the world, how they justified cooperation, how they constructed meaning. The night sky was their cathedral, available every clear night, for free, to everyone. Here is something that will seem strange from a modern perspective. For most of human history, dreams were not private experiences. They were public ones. The segmented sleep pattern we discussed earlier, that period of waking in the middle of the night, was almost certainly when dreams got processed, discussed, and interpreted within the group. You woke from your first sleep having come out of a vivid REM cycle. You were lying in physical proximity to the people closest to you. The natural thing to do, and the thing we see documented in cultures that still maintain anything close to this sleep pattern, was to talk about what you dreamed. This is not mysticism, though ancient interpretive frameworks for dreams certainly were mystical. This is social cognitive processing. Dreams are how the brain consolidates experience, works through unresolved conflicts, simulates scenarios, processes fear. The modern Western convention that this should happen in isolation and then be largely forgotten by morning is historically bizarre. For most of human existence, the dreamed content of group members was shared information, data about what individuals were worried about, what they were processing, where their attention was. A hunter who dreamed repeatedly of a particular terrain feature was paying unconscious attention to something. An elder whose dreams returned to the same conflict was processing something unresolved that might affect group decisions. A child's nightmares were visible to the adults who needed to respond to them. Dream sharing was an ancient, nightly, informal therapy, a mechanism for group emotional calibration that required no formal structure because it was simply what you did when you woke in the dark and someone was lying next to you.